Morning, everyone. I'm Shilpa Bindu. I work as a DSO specialist at ENTSO-E. On behalf of ENTSO-E and DSO entity, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this second public webinar on flexibility needs assessment methodology. Please be reminded that this session will be recorded and keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. You will be able to ask your questions during the Q&A session, which will be at the end of this webinar. And just a quick reminder that the objective of this webinar is to present the main comments that we received during the public consultation process. We submitted a preliminary draft during November-December period for public consultation, and we also submitted some explanatory notes describing the main concepts that we introduced through this methodology. So in this presentation, in this webinar, we will not be going through the basic concepts that were already presented during the first webinar. So if you're not familiar with the material, please go to this FNA public consultation page through using this QR. And if you scroll down, you can see the main links attached to the end of this page. Please go through that. And in this presentation, we'll be focusing on the public consultation part. That being said, this is our agenda for today. I will give you a brief background on the flexibility needs assessment methodology and the reason why we are talking about flexibility needs assessment all of a sudden. Then in the main content of this webinar will be the explanation of the public consultation responses. As I was saying earlier, our conveners, Mario from ENTSO-E and Uber Dupin from DSO entity will guide you through the updated draft that we are working on right now. And also we will be highlighting the main comments that we received throughout this public consultation process. If you had seen the draft, you would have seen that there were certain articles that were missing, especially the guiding principles. And also there is one major article that we propose right now, the fine-tuning of system needs with network data. So these two parts will be introduced for the first time today. And also, there will be some additional amendments to the methodology and some certain parts that we're also introducing. We'll go through that, and then towards the end, we'll have a Q&A session for your questions. And a bit background on our work. So flexibility is the ability of a power system to adjust to the variability of generation, consumption, and grid availability or network availability. This is a very important tool for the system operators to efficiently manage the variabilities that are introduced by the renewables, especially as the share of renewables get higher and higher. So recognizing this need, the electricity market design reform, or what is called as EU Regulation 2024/1747, requires the member states to adopt a report on the estimated flexibility needs at member state level for at least the next 5 to 10 years. And this report shall be based on the data and analysis provided by the TSOs and DSOs at national level. And in order to have a harmonized methodology at the member state level, ENTSO-E and DSO entity are tasked to develop a methodology for the analysis, as well as to define the data, the type and format of the data that is required for this analysis. And if the member states perceive a lack of investment in non-fossil flexibility, they may design support schemes for non-fossil flexibility. Before I go to the next slide, please be reminded that you can ask the questions during the Q&A. If you have any questions, you can already start using the Q&A session. So this regulation came to force in June 2024, and it already provided a deadline for ENTSO-E and DSO entity to submit the final draft to ACER for the approval, and that date was set as 17th April 2025. So that gave us less than 1 year to work on this methodology, and this is the first time we are developing something like this. So we had to suddenly start working, and we put together a drafting team from ENTSO-E and DSO entity and some observer members, and this is all coordinated by the Secretariat staff. And we also have a stakeholder group composed of different organizations. So all in all, we are represented by a lot of system operators as well as the stakeholders. So We started by having a lot of workshops with the stakeholders, involving them in the process. And parallelly, we were developing the methodology. And the first draft of the methodology was submitted for the public consultation, the reason why you're all here during November. This was not a mandated task from the regulation. We did it as an extra step to foster transparency. And also, this was a suggestion from European Commission to improve the transparency of the document. So we also had a public webinar to explain the main concepts introduced in this draft. And once the public consultation was closed, we started on the second step, which is the refinement of the methodology. And this part was done with a lot of interactions with ACER and European Commission. And today we are almost at the end of this process, and we are hosting a public webinar to give you a bit of overview of what is the updated draft and to discuss the main comments that we received through the public consultation process. We are well on our way to submit the draft to ACER on 16th of April. And before that, we'll have some internal approval process from both organizations. And the main consultation responses. So the consultation ran for around a month, and we received a total of 32 responses through the tool. This was submitted by different types of organizations, as you can see from the graph. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank each and every organization that took the time to closely review this document and provide us your valuable input. Thanks a lot for that. And in the following slides, in the following session, our conveners would be giving you an overview of the main comments that we received and also how the draft has progressed throughout this period. Over to you, Hubert.
Hello, everyone. I'm Hubert Dupin from NADIS. I'm representing today EU DSO entity. And on behalf of the DSO entity, I welcome you to this webinar. Indeed, as Shilpa said, it's very important for us to interact with all stakeholders when we develop a methodology. And we thank you a lot for the input you gave during the public consultation. We took it on board, we improved the draft, and indeed, the draft that you read has evolved a lot. You can see that the structure of the document has been improved and better streamlined. In particular, we worked a lot on the national implementation. Just to make it short, who does what when? We will have a section on it later on. We did work as well to implement provisions regarding the unavailability of flexible resources due to grid prequalification and temporal limits. These issues are foreseen in network core demand response, which is still under development, which basically are processes where system operators advance system services or bids to go to the market in case they would create congestion to the network while activating. So indeed, it is important in this assessment to take into account that matter. We also improved a lot the interactions of system needs with network needs. Likewise, if there are congestions at DSO or TSO level, then that prevents, for example, generation to reach the system. How does it interact with the system needs? We worked a lot. We developed articles that were missing on guiding criteria. We will explain it later on what it is. And also we address market barriers to say that TSO and DSO are mandated to provide data and analysis, but these market barriers will be inserted in the national report and drafted by the national entity or authority. We did improve a lot the definitions. We worked a lot on streamlining inputs, outputs, methods, indicators, and template. Now they are fully developed. And also there was a lot of comments on addressing consistency. Consistency is addressed in different ways. First, because we align within the methods TSO and DSOs on NECP target, National Energy Climate Plan. We also align on defining our needs on the same target years. And we also consider that whatever the input we use, which is ERA, National Adequacy Assessment, TYNDP, 10-year network development plan for TSOs or distribution network development plans, are intrinsically mandated to be consistent with National Energy Climate Plan and with whatever scenarios the others use. So basically, there is intrinsic consistency, and we improve consistency by specific provisions. We also ensure that at national level, we develop coordinated granularity in terms of time, which is what is the time frames we are considering. We will have examples on it. Spatial granularity, where is this needs located, and voltage granularity, which means low voltage, medium voltage, and high voltage, and so forth. That's the main provisions that we improved in the draft, and then we will go over the details. Maybe you can switch to the next slide, please. Okay, we did improve definitions. It was a question of how do we define network flexibility and what is the scope. We have made definitions on it. We have made recitals to better describe what FlexWorks flexibility needs, what's the scope, what's a constant, what do they cover, what do they come from. We also, of course, differentiated between upward needs, which is basically upwards is whatever you need. So basically, it's either will be solved by increasing injection into the system or lowering demand into the network. And you can do both. And likewise, downwards flexibility needs is the opposite. So we did improve those definitions, and now they are fully developed. We had also a concern on some people said, yes, your definitions are not fully consistent with network code on demand response. For this, we still improve the definition. However, now Acer is finalizing the network code demand response. So we have not seen it for a while. So yes, we update it for as much as we know, but whenever network code demand response will be known, then probably there should be some further adaptation, but for the time being, we cannot do better than we did. And also there were some concerns that the definitions were not fully consistent with the regulation of 2019 and the regulation from last year. We have also improved the definitions. On the next slide, we will not stay long for this. We will have the slides later on, but you can see how we have better aligned the definitions with the definitions of the regulations, network flexibility needs, system flexibility needs, REST integration, ramping needs, short-term flexibility. These are examples on how we worked on the definitions to improve. Next slide. The question was roles and responsibilities, delegation, and national implementation. How is this thing operated? There have been many concerns on it, and we have also improved it a lot. First was a concern of an efficient implementation at European level and building on ENTSO-E and DSO entity. The provision is that now ENTSO-E and DSO entity, we will provide guidance on how DSOs and TSOs shall interpret and apply the FNA methodology. European Association will not work on the delivery of actual data and analysis. This is to be handled at national level. And on DSO entity, we will build on lessons learned from this assessment, next year assessment, and every other year assessments. We will build on lessons learned to progressively develop guidance for DSOs based on lessons learned. How do we compute the flexibility needs? There was some concern from stakeholders that we should also specify the role of the national regulatory authority or the designated entity or authority. We have to recognize that the mandate that is given to ENTSO-E and EU DSO within this methodology does not cover the roles or the task of this entity. It only covers the type and format of data which we will have to deliver. So that's what's in the mandate. However, we refine provisions on how DSOs and TSOs interact with these national entities, national authority, NRA, because it's I would say a teamwork. So we need to make sure what we have to provide to whom and when. And that's we do not rule what they have to do. We do not rule neither what member states has to do. There was also a concern because there was a lot of many provisions on DSO delegation, that is distribution system operator, delegating to other distribution system operators to perform data and analysis. Some stakeholders says if DSO delegates, then let's have the member state to assign. We worked around those concerns, and now we have a whole new article on the national implementation, who does what when. We have also delegation. You have to understand that DSO delegation is intrinsically linked to who will perform the computations, and indeed with which method will these computations be done. So that's intrinsically done, and while we delegate, there is also a concern of confidentiality. So basically, we took on board your concern, many as you wished, some we could not, and some we adapted. The following slide was about the timeline. And here we had two opposite requests. Some stakeholders say speed up, leave more time, deliver the data and analysis of DSOs and TSO faster, insert a public consultation, and give more time for the national entity or authority to adopt the report. Basically, compress the time for DSOs and TSOs. On the other hand, we have many stakeholders saying that the schedule is way too fast for DSOs and TSOs to provide new data, because indeed it is to provide new data. It is to process data that exists, but make new data and analysis. And it is a way too challenging schedule to provide a good quality data. There were even some concerns to have a different schedule between TSOs and DSOs. Well, obviously, we had to manage all these expectations. Yes, this method is to deliver data and analysis and adopt a report. So first, we need to have a good data and analysis provision. We improve this. But while doing this, we need to define at national level the process to deliver the data. Consider that in some countries, there are more than 100 DSOs that need to coordinate, and the data has to be consolidated. We have provisions, however, to improve the process, to define, of course, common target years. TSOs and DSOs will provide the data for the same years. We also improve and speed up the process by defining the same temporal granularity, which is years and time blocks, as we will see, spatial, voltage. And once we have defined all this, then we need to provide data. That obviously takes a bit of time. And while we do this, of course, we need to create new methods, adjust new methods existing, because we never have done this. So now what is in the article, we provide a timeline at national level, who does what when, involving TSOs and DSOs. When do we have to deliver data? When can we expect to receive data to start our analysis? If we don't know the scope, then it's a problem to deliver on time. And we have defined the schedule with upper boundaries. So it's no later than 10 months after the approval of the methodology and 2 years thereafter that we deliver data. We do not set a time frame for NRA or anyone, because in the regulation itself, there is no time frame for the National Regulatory Authority to send data to Acer, for example. And public consultation, we did not insert as well. We do not have time, and we do not foresee such a need for a public consultation during the process, because basically it's processing data that already exists. There are methods. The methods is within this methodology, it is approved, and then it is to run the algorithm. There is not much space or reason to publicly consult, basically computations. So that's how we involved and improved the national timeline. Maybe to leave it as a sketch. So mid-July, ESA approves the methodology. We have 3 months to define the preliminary agreement, which is basically the timing at national level. Receiving from the national authority maybe additional data with respect to the minimum requirements of the regulation. And this is over summer. basically. So it's difficult to compress it. And then we deliver the data, we implement, we deliver, we interact DSOs and DSOs. And in particular, we deliver ready-to-use data and analysis to the national entity authority, which is not supposed to rerun the data. The mandate asks for, or the regulation asks for TSOs and DSOs to perform the analysis and deliver the data, and the national authority is to adapt the report, not to rerun the analysis. And while adopting the report, the national authority draft up the assessment regarding market barriers and contribution of digitalization, which basically leaves it between May and July. And then after that, that's the approval of an array, which is not constrained by the regulation, so we could not constrain it within this method. Now I leave it over to Mario.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hubert. So I take from here, and I also share, my thanking, let's say, to everyone that participated in the public consultation. They were very good input. So we now pass first, last step, let's say, on the consistency aspect, and then, we start discussing a bit the elements related to, okay, how we basically define the various sections of the methodology for system need, for network need, this fine-tuning, so that everything is clear, and there is a clear process to the start from the input and arrives to the quantification of the needs for the system entirely. But first, some elements of consistency that provides a bit of clarity. So there were many points raised during the public consultation related to, okay, but where you're taking the input, how do you assume consistency? Now, let's say that consistency is really embedded in the methodology, so it's a central part of it. It's a bit, let's say, by design that we are consistent, because we are relying on studies and information that are already existing. Of course, for the TSOs is mostly the adequacy studies. For the DSOs is mostly the distribution network development plan. But they are, of course, related to scenarios which are compatible, consistent with the National Energy and Climate Plans, so our NECPs. So the TSOs and DSOs basically align on using a scenario, a set of data which is consistent with the same policy scenario. And they also agree on additional data to make sure that, so basically to additional potential target years to be considered with respect to the one which is aligned with the policy, to make sure that there is always consistency. And also, of course, the type of information is related to the latest published report, so either adequacy or distribution network development plan, so that, of course, it is something that has been already, let's say, presented and validated at national level or European level. Availability of DSO data. Of course, this I can also leave to you a bit, Hubert. This is mostly on the DSO, but basically, this is saying that we take information, of course, with the granularity that we have. So we know that the distribution network studies are, of course, providing information often with a different granularity with respect to the TSO ones, which are running hourly typically. But in the fine-tuning, we also define some approaches to make sure that we can make use of this information with the best quality as possible, so with the highest granularity as possible, trying to apply, whenever the granularity is not the same, some approaches to distribute the information and make use of them. So we'll go back in this in a dedicated session. Make data available. Also, in this case, there were requests, of course, for sharing the information associated to the study. And in here, we must say that, of course, the data which is input to the methodology is basically already available. The NDP's data are available, and also ERA or National Adequacy Studies information, which are consistent with ERA, are basically available. So the ERA information, for instance, are publicly provided in the ENTSO-E website. And of course, the output of the methodology will be included in the report, so they will be publicly available as well. And finally, some elements on coordination with gas and hydrogen operators. Definitely, this is something that is embedded also in the methodology, because Everything is starting from scenarios in which there have been already interactions with all these actors. So basically, the numbers you see as an input to the methodology are, of course, numbers which have been already agreed basically with these operators. Okay, we can move to the next slide. And let's use this one, let's say, as a description of the process. It is very useful because then we go into each of these small orange blocks, basically providing more information about how to basically quantify the various type of needs and how to arrive to this guiding criteria at the very end. So the schematic is not very different from the one that you probably saw in the supporting material that we provided together with the document for public consultation. It didn't change at the very end. It's just a bit more complex, let's say, with respect to that one. But here we wanted to show basically all the steps that are needed. Of course, there is a section of input. As I mentioned, we have different sources of input, the TSOs and the DSOs. For the TSOs, is mainly the European Adequacy Assessment or the National Adequacy Assessment Study. I'll go in a second in detail to explain why the two are consistent. And other sources of information, the ones that are not currently covered by the adequacy studies, for example, the information about the forecast error or the RES integration target. Then, of course, the DSOs in turn have, as a main source, the distribution network development plan, but they are also taking some other information that are coming as provisions from the network code demand-side response, which are related basically to prequalification and temporary limits, and also information related to procurement of local services, which are also needed to some pieces of this methodology. Then the output, which is, output, but is basically, how we implement basically the methodology. Is the methodology itself. You see also references to the articles. Each type of need has a specific article. Of course, on the, let's say, TSO side, we have the system need first. So the big box in the middle, which is RES integration, ramping needs, and short-term needs, the ones that we presented in the public consultation. And we'll explain in a second how we treated a bit the input that you also provided. And transmission network needs, so the ones associated to congestion at the transmission level. The DSOs are also providing distribution network needs, so basically the same concept but associated to the distribution network. And we are also getting information from this unavailability of flexible resources due to prequalification and temporary limits. One element that is important to highlight in here, we are addressing these type of needs, so system needs and transmission and distribution network needs first individually, but then of course, provided some conditions apply, some threshold related to relevance, we also have the opportunity to fine-tune the system need. So basically to take into account as much as possible the things that are happening basically at the network level, so things that are associated to congestions, to fine-tune our quantification of system needs. And everything then goes into the guiding criteria. So each individual need, and also if carried out, the fine-tuned ones, to provide more information basically with respect to just the analysis to the policymaker to identify the best technologies, the best resources that can cover the needs. Okay, so we can move to the next slide. Let's start first by, or let's complete a bit the picture, let's say, focusing a second on the system needs specifically, because there is an element that was very much present in your input, in your comments during the public consultation, which is of course related to this consistency between ERA and National Adequacy Assessment, and then what is the interactions with the FNA. So this slide is a bit summarizing also how the TSOs can basically approach the quantification of the needs, because we put some options basically for the TSOs, depending on the one side on the availability of data and tools, on the other side on the opportunity to produce more accurate analysis basically. But the point is, starting point can be the ERA set of input, the ERA, the NRA set of input, so the National Adequacy Assessment set of input. But when we use one or the other, we are basically using very consistent information because they are based on the same scenario. For those that are familiar with the adequacy studies, for instance, it's basically saying that either the ERA or the national adequacy assessment are based on the same national trend scenario, which is one of the reference scenario of the ERA study. So, but in this case, you have the option to use this input, see the output, and then run a processing of this output. This is the simplest way in which you can quantify flexibility needs. That you are consistent, so you need to choose among the European study or the national study, and then by processing the output of the market simulation results, basically, of the ERA or the national adequacy assessment, together with other information, which are the other national input, the ones I was referring to, for example, the forecast error, you arrive to the quantification of flexibility needs. Or you have the option to also run a separate economic dispatch simulation, but in this case, based on the same set of ERA or national adequacy assessment input, plus the additional information. So all in all, you arrive to the same type of output. So basically, it's the same set or format of information. What changes is a bit let's say the quality at the end of the analysis you can make, because with separate economic dispatch, of course, you have the capability to model in a more granular way some aspects. So, but we gave, especially for this first round, the option, for the TSOs to run these different, let's say, approaches, which are based on the same input, very much consistent, and arrive into the same consistent set of output. Okay. Now we go a bit more in detail into the methodology itself, starting first with some questions, then we'll discuss system needs, and then move into network needs. So questions is basically what you ask us during the public consultation. There were some input related to the REST integration needs, in particular how we were going to characterize what we call at the time dummy flags. This has now a bit changed also in the terminology. But I'll arrive to this question in a second in the next slide, because I'll explain how we improved basically the quantification of REST integration, ramping, and short-term needs. And so we go in detail in a second. The second one I reply now is long-term flexibility. There were many input related to Dunkelflaute, so periods of shortage or renewable generation or high residual load, long periods. So an issue which is, of course, very relevant and which is associated to the quantification of long-term needs. So we discussed a lot this point internally. Was a very relevant one because, of course, this is something that is a bit between the adequacy and the flexibility. It's an important element, of course, of the methodology. We acknowledge that adequacy is already covering in many aspects the Dunkelflaute problem, because, of course, also for those that are familiar with the adequacy studies, we are starting from a very wide set of climate data. So, and this climate data already take into account periods in which for a few days or weeks, we have shortage of renewables. So this is accounted in the quantification of the indicators of the ERA, so the energy not served or the LOLE. However, we also recognize that in the REST integration need, of course, when trying to quantify the needs associated to the long term, so basically the seasonal needs, the approach that we are using is basically checking if there is at the same time in 1 year a period of surplus of REST generation and a period of shortage. And of course, the more you have this difference along the year, the higher is the long duration need, basically, so the seasonal need. And this is to confirm that the methodology is, of course, addressing this aspect, which is also support to mitigating Dunkelflaute-related problems. And then input data formats, again, the element of consistency, we would just wanted to repeat also here, that, of course, we are now consistent because we are basing everything on the same scenario across member states. So we need to comply with at least the policy scenario that we have, and it is common. I mean, we all have in our member states a national energy and climate plan, and we have in the ERA a scenario which is compliant with this policy information. So that one represents the starting point. Also, our colleagues, DSOs, of course, they are basing the NDPs on the policy information they have. So these ensure globally consistency. And also, I mean, of course, the transparency for input data, everything is now clear. So what is the data that we are using as an input to the methodology, and the type and format of data that is provided to the designated entity is part of a dedicated annex in the methodology. Okay, system needs. You can go to the next slide. You remember that we had 3 different type of indicators: REST integration needs, ramping needs, and short-term flexibility needs. I'll briefly mention again what is that we are quantifying. So what we propose in the public consultation, basically, and also what is that we change with respect to that one. REST integration need. You remember that basically the idea here is to quantify the flexibility which is associated to the achievement of REST integration target. We all have some REST integration target in our member states. So basically, we have some targets for installing renewables, but there is also a target for making sure that the energy that is produced from renewables can be integrated into the system. There is an European level, an overall target for REST share. So we need to ensure this, the achievement of this target. So here the point is, okay, we quantify and assess, first of all, REST curtailment and residual load time series, which are resulting from the market simulation results of ERA or adequacy study. And then if, with respect to these results, we are not capable of reaching this REST integration target, then we address the problem by identifying in a very technology neutral way additional capacity, additional technologies, flexible technologies that can basically help us achieving this REST integration target, while at the same time mitigating or reducing flexibility needs associated to different time frames, so daily, weekly, and seasonal. How are we doing this? So we need to keep this technology neutrality. So we cannot nominate the technologies directly, but at the same time, we need to arrive to some, what we call I don't remember anymore, capability types. So basically some information that is clear for the policymaker. It's an information in gigawatts, okay, that we need to install additional technologies. So we basically introduce the concept of additional flexible resources that are characterized in terms of a few parameters like the power, energy capacity, energy to power ratio, availability, and round trip efficiency. The idea is that we model all these different technologies that are a combination of these parameters and see what is their impact, their contribution to reducing REST integration, to reducing REST curtailment. So that, we have a full span of technologies and the benefits they can provide. And in the article on the guiding criteria, we go even beyond this. It's not only quantification, but it's also comparison of the benefits that they can provide basically in achieving this target. So this information remains technology neutral, and from a very technical perspective is giving to the policymakers some information on what are the technologies based on the combination of these parameters that can best support the reduction of daily, weekly, and seasonal needs, and at the same time meeting the REST integration target. Also on the REST integration target, we clarified what is a definition and then where to find it and what happens if at national level the NECP doesn't have any REST integration target. So everything is clear so that there is basically a full range of options for the TSOs to run this assessment. Ramping needs and short-term flexibility needs didn't change very much with respect to also the version that you saw. I mean that we improved a lot the terminology and the wording, but in reality the concept didn't change basically because ramping need is still the idea of basically quantifying flexibility needs both upward and downward, which are associated to the basically the incapability of the system to covering the ramp in the both directions up and down because of technical constraints of the generation units or the flexible units in general. So this is something that is very complementary to the adequacy assessment, because adequacy doesn't look into these technical constraints or units. So we are doing in the ramping needs. We are checking if the system is technically capable of managing the ramps, basically. And the short-term flexibility needs, it's again very similar as a concept, but we are not looking at the basically the day-ahead information, the perfect forecast of the residual load. We are looking at the errors from the day ahead to the real time. So we are checking if the system with the residual technologies that are available, with the residual flexibility with respect to the results of the market simulation, is capable of managing, also considering the technical constraints, these errors, which could result in an additional ramp up or ramp down. So everything now is a bit more clear in the methodology. Each step is individually described so that the TSO can basically start from the input and arrive to the quantification of the output. Okay, next slide. Another set of, let's say, comments that we received. On the first one, it's, why is REST surplus managed and not deficit? This is related to the REST integration need, but again, is to clarify that the deficit is basically an adequacy concern, which is already covered in the adequacy studies in the ERA, in the national adequacy ones. On the contrary, the ERA, the adequacy, is not looking specifically, is not checking if at the end of the process you are also achieving your REST integration target. So this is something that we are addressing in the flexibility needs assessment in a very complementary way to ERA. Output of ERA already consider fossil-based flexibility. This is an element that is important also to clarify. Of course, whenever we talk about technologies, resources, although this is in a technology-neutral way, we are only referring to fossil-free, technologies, because this is a requirement of the regulation. It is true that the ERA, of course, is potentially addressing also fossil technologies, but in reality, the starting point, of course, of the FNA, it's the ERA set of input and output. So basically, the reference condition that is in the scenario, let's say for 2030, which already considers whatever is existing or planned to be realized because of existing capacity remuneration mechanism. So if the member state has some CRMs in place that says that some fossil fuel technology will be realized by a certain target year, that is part of the reference case. So it's included already at the beginning of the approach. So we estimate flexibility needs with respect to that reference condition. At the same time, we are not including the possible additional resources, whatever the source is, that would be needed to comply with some adequacy need, basically. Because the starting point is the market simulation of adequacy, which only provides information about the energy not served and LOE at the end, but is not giving any clue on the technologies that could be needed to reduce, for example, this energy not served. So with respect to that, there is two paths, adequacy and flexibility. And then our needs overlaps in different timelines. I go very quickly. Timelines here I interpreted as time frames. And in here, basically, we are making sure that, of course, we quantify the different type of needs associated to the various time frames individually, and then we check how the various technologies can contribute to reducing each of these type of needs. So a technology, maybe one with a very low energy to power ratio, it's maybe more beneficial for short-term needs, so the daily ones, for example. On the contrary, another one which very high, 200 hours of energy to power ratios, for example, would be very beneficial for the long duration. So we provide the full span of results, and then it would be together with the guiding criteria to the policymaker to make a decision on what is best to use or to include in the National Energy and Climate Plan as a target. Okay, and last one, very quickly, we're also addressing transmission network needs. Two types in here, downward transmission network needs, so basically something which is resulting in RES curtailment or generation curtailment, but we focus on RES curtailment due to local constraints, so congestions at the transmission level. This is something that we quantify in a specific article, but then there's an option, depending also on some criteria that we clarified in the methodology, to use this information to fine-tune the system need, specifically the REST integration need. And there will be a slide on this one later. And the upward transmission network needs, so basically the opposite direction, we have some demand shaving, basically energy not delivered because of congestions at the transmission level that we were not able to see in the market simulation of ERA. And also in this case, there is the option for the TSOs to quantify this specific concern. And it's represented at the end in, energy not delivered, information hourly level, gigawatts, basically. Okay, I stop here and pass the floor again to Hubert for the DSOs needs.
Yes, thank you, Mario. There were many comments regarding the distribution and network flexibility needs. We also acknowledge there are lots of expectations regarding distribution network development plan, and we try to address and make the bridge the NDP with this assessment. First question is, there are so many DSOs out there. How will you organize to provide data and analysis which is consistent and in a timely manner? We did improve the content. In fact, we split the provisions into 2 articles. One specifically dedicated to roles and responsibilities, and an article with a timeline associated with these roles. When it comes to the roles and responsibility, we make sure that each DSO is responsible for providing quality data and analysis in a timely manner, but we also enable DSOs to delegate to some other DSO, to a TSO, or even to a third party if it is more efficient to deliver the data. When there are many DSOs in a country, it may be not statistically relevant to give a data per DSO, but it makes the assessment way more significant and way more reliable if we somehow aggregate the data. Then who's going to aggregate this data? This is handled through delegation. You can handle with a TSO that has a large area. You can delegate to a DSO that is just like you are rural, you delegate to rural. We enable any type of delegation, but you still remain responsible. What is important is the quality, the correctness and completeness of the data. Once we have set the roles and responsibilities, we have also defined the timeline. Like I said earlier, within 3 months, all system operators at national level have to agree on basically the data that is compatible with each other. So the same target years and the same granularity. We define the granularity in space and in voltage. That's very important in terms of roles and responsibility. Another set of comments regarding where do we get our data from? How do we ensure this data is consistent? We have worked a lot around it, and again, the core of our data is basically a network development plan for DSOs. It has the good properties of being aligned. We will have a special slide on it, but basically the core is the NDP. And again, we define the granularity. We also made a specific provisions, and along the provision of data, we also have to make clear of the source of data we use, the study we use, the scenario we used, and the methods we use. So basically, you'll get the data, but you know where it comes from. That's, I believe, also important. There was also a request from stakeholders to include specific technologies. That we could not take on board because the flexibility needs that we compute are intrinsically technology neutral. It is a need in megawatt hour, but it doesn't care as a need how it is provided. It's a need. When it comes to guiding criteria, it's again technology neutral criteria, and then that's how you can assess whether a technology matches or not. So it's how you use the output of the method. It's not used as an input for the computations. It was also a lot of comments on what is it exactly that DSO provide in terms of data. Can you provide examples? We have made a table, different sets of table, which I will show later on, how the data looks like, what are we supposed to provide. And we made a distinction between mandatory data, which is a minimum set of data, and optional data that can be provided if it is available. And each set of data, we worked with DSO to assess how can it be interfaced with system needs and network needs. So basically, we will have all table of data, and yeah, we will see it later on. There were also some requests that we should work on market barriers and digitization, and that it should be in the methodology. It is in the methodology, but it is said that it is not TSO or DSO to assess market barriers. We will not judge ourselves how good we do our job on market. We are not objective. That's a role of an external entity, national entity or national authority. And likewise, contribution of digitalization, it's not for us to judge. There is some data, and it's a role of the national entity to aggregate this data. So it's part of the assessment, it's part of the report, but it's not part of the data and analysis for DSOs and TSOs to provide. If we go to the next slide, that's really important to see how distribution network development plan is, at the end of the day, the core outlook for DSO. It's really a very good source of data. It contains scenarios. Nationally consistent with the national scenarios of TSOs. It's nationally consistent with NECPs, and it is consulted with stakeholders. So it is the best scenario we have out there. It also includes transparency on the planning methods. And therefore, it provides a lot of data. And the NDP is also where we should assess our flexibility needs. So wherever the NDP is available, we will make the best use of the NDP. However, there are also some other studies that are not run under the NDP. For example, studies we perform in the framework of network tariffs. There are studies that we perform on request of entities or national entities or whatever member state. This is also a lot of studies out there which we can make best use. As another source of data, there could be also market information that we publish whenever we procure local services pursuant to network code demand response. In any case, whenever we use a data, it should have all the good properties that you expect from a network development plan. It should be clear on the scenarios and assumptions. Consistency is built in the NDP, but where the NDP is not available, in any case, the scenarios have to be consistent. They have to clearly identify the services that we need, local services we need. They need to be coordinated between TSOs and DSOs. And of course, they need to encompass the future demand generation, storage capacities. In other words, what are our future customers? How do we plan to connect them? And once they are on the network, they will eventually be able to solve or create congestion issues. In terms of methods, the NDP makes transparency, and we have as DSOs to publish and to assess how we assess flexibility. That's what you should have if you do not use the NDP. Again, the methods are coordinated with the methods of TSOs, and in the methods, we of course consider the capacity from the available grid capacity for connection for new system users. And likewise, there is a two-sided way of the things. We have new assets and flexibilities, and of course, one is dependent on each other. So we, within the DNDP, will provide outlook on the plan and ongoing investment for the next 5 to 10 years. And likewise, we will provide outlook for our flexibility needs over the next 5 to 10 years. And these needs will be consistent with NECP. Mario talked earlier of consistency by design. This is a very important part of consistency by design. We may have many DSOs nationally, but they all will share the same coordination with TSO. They will all be coordinated with other DSOs and TSOs. They will all share the same energy climate plan. And yeah, by design, there is no need for an additional layer of extra consistency. Consistency is already built in, embedded. It's by design. So that's how we solve our concerns. If we go on the next slide, we can see the data that we will provide. Essentially, we will provide 5 types of data and analysis. The first one, as we call the table 2, is indeed what are our flexibility needs. We will have examples later on. What is we need to prevent or solve congestion of voltage through active power. That's computations in megawatt hour. Why do we need a DSO flexibility need? It is important to know what is when we have flexibility need. There are 2 things. First, we need to give information to TSO where is this need coming from, and that enables to match and to fine-tune system needs and network needs. If we say there is a lot of needs coming from PV, then of course it's an information to fine-tune. There is a lot of need coming from wind farms, it's another information. But also, is there a specific framework that are implemented nationally and that creates a lot of flexibility, or to the opposite, decrease the need for flexibility? There are concerns about go-to areas to incentivize customers to go in a specific areas. Does it work or does it not? Does it create congestions or does it not create congestions? We also have some frameworks to connect specific customers in specific areas or at specific voltage level. Indeed, while we assess our flexibility needs, we take the opportunity of these methods to somehow give consolidated figures to the member states and NRA. How are the framework creating flexibility need, creating congestions? Do we connect renewables they cannot produce because of network congestions, or is there an issue or not? It's very important that we address the reasoning for DSO network flexibility need. Traceability. We all have, or we may all have different methods, but at the end of the day, what were the methods to provide the data? What is the source of data? What is the scenario we use? It was a request and we have it. Then, of course, we provide the data pursuant and used by TSOs to fine-tune system needs. But we made table 2 in a way that TSO can use it. So I would say it's built in. And as well, we will extract from the national report of grid prequalification and temporary limits, as it is foreseen in network code demand response, useful data to assess the unavailability of resources to solve congestions or for system needs. And finally, we provide guiding criteria on which resources can cover our needs. So basically, these are all 5 types of data and analysis that we will provide, and they are provided at the bottom of the slides. You see which articles of the methods is handling everything. Now let's jump on a typical table 2. The minimum data set is to provide a yearly value of the needs. So first you see that we report needs in upwards or downwards direction. We define a target year. The minimum target year is the NECP target year 2030, but we can also define at national level additional target years. Then we refine within a target year time block. Time block can be an entire year, can block can be a season, can block can be a month, time block could be days, work days and weekends, it can be nights or daylight. It can be fine-tuned. The minimum data set is entire year, but we can fine-tune it. If we have PV generation and needs related to PV generation, it's not throughout the year. It's probably less in winter than it is in summertime, and it's definitely 0 at nighttime. It's more concentrated at daytime. So whenever we can fine-tune the time block, whenever we can shorten it or have different needs, we do it. as we have seen, for upwards networks needs, it's basically when we have issues of demand, it's probably assuming here it's whenever winter comes, there is a lot of demand, and then we don't have issues in summer, but only in winter. That's an example how we can fine-tune this time block. And going back, when we organize nationally, we define the time blocks that will be used nationally. I think someone has changed the slide. I'm missing my table too. Yes, it's back. No, maybe the previous one, which is easier. Then we define the voltage granularity. Do we report need at medium voltage, high voltage, low voltage? And then we have two sets of value. The total energy over the time block, if we define, or the entire year is the time block is a year, or over the time block, if we make it shorter. And the summation of the maximum local power, whenever we have a congestion, we have a maximum power locally, and then we add up all these values, and that makes the maximum values that we need. And on this table, you can see whatever data we want. So basically, this table too is a minimum data set. An additional data set is to fine-tune the time block, make different time blocks throughout the year. We can also have the spatial granularity. Here we made a bidding zones, but we can make by region. We can streamline it in finer, a spatial granularity. This is the data that we need to define at national level. Okay, now I hand it over to Mario for fine-tuning.
Yes, for the fine-tuning. Thanks, Hubert. So far, we described the system need and transmission and distribution network needs individually, but as anticipated, we also discussed approaches to try to use this information consistently and arrive to the quantification basically of the total flexibility needs for the power system. What's the problem in here? That basically, we acknowledge that we have on the one side the system need, which are analyzed, in copper plate conditions. So basically, looking everything from the system perspective. And then we have transmission and distribution network needs. So basically something that is happening locally. The problem is that we cannot quantify these needs individually and then sum them. So basically do the sum, the total, because this is not a correct operation. It could basically result in a bit of double counting. A technology that is introduced to solve a local need is also supporting the system when there is not the local problem, so in all the other hours. And at the same time, we cannot capture, the totality of the local problems when we run only system need assessment. So in that case, we will be underestimating our needs. So we need to face this problem, let's say, on the one side of trying to be very complete in our assessments, so avoid any underestimation, but at the same time, avoiding any overlaps. So basically, the approach that we propose, define together with the DSOs and propose, is concerning mostly the REST integration need. And the idea is basically that we reflect the transmission and distribution network needs on the system need, basically. So we take into account the information that we can capture with the granularity, the highest granularity possible that are happening at the network level, and then we are reflecting them at the system need level to operate what we call the fine-tuning of system needs. This is for the REST integration, and I'll explain a bit more in the next slide. And then we are also taking into consideration the unavailability of flexible resources, which is resulting from pre-qualification and temporary limits, to also basically derate flexible technologies that are already considered, for example, in our market simulation results of the year of the National Adequacy Assessment, to take into account the fact that because of local needs, some of these technologies might not be available. And this is coming from information directly in the registers of flexible resources. So if you go to the next slide, there is an explanation a bit more of how we intend to do this fine-tuning applied to the REST integration need. So if we, starting from the top left, if you run the assessment of the REST integration need only from the system level perspective, what we obtain at the end or what we use in any case to quantify our additional flexible resources that are needed to achieve the RES integration target at national level, is we look at the RES curtailment time series. So this is, of course, an extract, is a simplification, but we have a time series. We know for each hour, basically, if we are in excess of generation with respect to demand. And normally, this is enough in Article 9, which is system need, to quantify my RES integration need. But we are also addressing downward needs at the transmission and distribution level, which is the chart in the middle and the one on the right. At the transmission level, so basically we are looking at downward needs associated, also in this case in the form of time series, but associated to local congestion at the transmission level. And the DSOs Hubert was showing us will be providing downward needs, the annual one, or more granular if it is a season, if it is a month, a specific day, night period, and so on, in which they would also be expecting some RES curtailment due to local congestion at the distribution level. And in the depending on the granularity of the information, we propose in the methodology some approaches to convert the information in hourly information so that we can basically compare the three type of time series. So the system needs one and then the network needs once, RES curtailment, and arrive to a final one, let's say, a fine-tuned one, which is in this case is basically the maximum for each hour of the RES curtailment that we observe at the different level of analysis. Why the maximum? Because basically we need to make sure that we don't double count our needs. So if there is something that is already experienced at national level, basically looking from the system perspective, and at the same time there is a local need, the need is already accounted with our system need assessment. So we don't need to double count. That's why we take the maximum. And then, of course, this information, it can now be used again, basically the final RES curtailment, the fine-tuned one, including also the reflection of transmission and distribution network needs, can be used to run again the analysis that we that I just described in relation to the RES curtailment indicator, but now with fine-tuned information that take into account the totality, of the RES curtailment of the power system that we are analyzing. So this, let's say, complete a bit the picture on the fine-tuning. Again, the idea is that we run our assessment, let's say, for the system and network needs individually, and then we use the information at the level of the network and reflect this information on the system need so that we avoid any double counting. Yes, Hubert, back to you for the first part of guiding criteria now.
Yes, when we will provide table 2 data, it will be, so the DSO needs data, it is aggregated nationally. But knowing that I need so many hundreds or megawatts or gigawatts nationally doesn't tell anyone what is the size of an asset that should be localized nationally. Likewise, the local need in terms will be defined in terms of time, during which hour do I need it, what is the output, what is the actual data. All this data is indeed provided, will be provided mainly when we procure local services under network code demand response. When we procure these services, we will, of course, define the location. Yes, if it's within a bidding zone, it doesn't help me to know it's in south of France. You need to know at which transformer, which feeder. That's one of the main issues in terms of guiding criteria. Where do I need to be located? You will find it in the market information. When do I need it? Between which hour and which hour? All this information, when we procure local services, you'll have the finest granularity. If we aggregate this data, then we blur the data. So indeed, for each technology or each asset developer, whatever, they get the information from the actual procurement. So location, time frame, maximum power, and issues of time, and available, if available, the economic criteria, and if we have additional criteria. All these needs all this data is available at the proper granularity in the market information. Then everyone can use it, but that's where we get this information. So the criteria are this one, and the actual parameters are the published one under market procurement. We have the overall picture. Yes, nationally, I need so many gigawatt, I need so many hundred of megawatt hours or whatever. But yeah, to design a specific asset, to assess whether your technology matches or not, you will find the information in the market. It does make a difference whether it's 2 gigawatt as a single location, which is not, or 100 locations of 10 megawatts. So that's what you will find in the market information. So it's very simple, it's very transparent, it's published to everyone. So the overall need describes basically how this thing will evolve, because our needs, they occur where they occur, and they occur when they occur at any given location. Yeah, it's kind of a tautology. Whereas, and they can increase, they can decrease, and you'll get the information through the market procurement. So that's basically the idea of guiding criteria for DSO needs. Now to you, Mario.
And then for the TSOs, but just a bit again of context, because of course the guiding criteria was the missing article in the public consultation. Basically, we only provided a general idea, okay, of what was the approach we were going to define, and then translate into the text of the methodology. And again, it's these are information that would be useful for the policymaker to take, let's say, informed decision of the technologies that could best suit the flexibility needs quantified in the FNA report. So this is extra information with respect to the analysis, the quantification of the RES integration, the ramping and the short-term needs, and also the network needs. So with this perspective, the idea is basically to provide additional sub-indicators with respect to the needs associated, let's say, to the TSOs, but also the fine-tuned ones. So the ones that also account for the distribution network needs, for instance, providing sub-indicators that would clarify, first of all, what are the technical requirements associated to the need. I take an example on this. For the ramping needs, for example, the ramping is looking basically at uncovered ramps, so capacity that we need to add to the system to make sure that we can manage a variational residual load from 1 hour to the other. Let's think of a ramp up problem. So we cannot cover the variation of the residual load ramp because of the technical constraints of the generation and flexible units that we have. So we need something else. But now this something else, the decision whether it is a given technology or other depends on a number of factors. One of them is, for example, the frequency and the duration of the problems that we are facing. So if there is a few consecutive hours every time in which we are not capable of meeting this ramp, is very different than if this is happening just once a year, for a very high peak, and then nothing else. So this is giving us more information, or it's giving actually the policymaker more information to take informed decision on what could be the technologies to cover, in this case, the ramping needs. On the RES integration, we are actually doing something even more granular and interesting. That is basically the results of the chart you see on the left. Because I already mentioned that for the RES integration need, what we are doing in the Article 9, which is described in the methodology, is we are basically assessing the contribution of different technologies made, of a combination of technical parameters to reduce basically the RES curtailment at the system level. So we are starting from our era or adequacy results. We have some extra surplus and the results in curtailment that we need to manage. We see what happens if we model and integrate the technology with a certain set of parameters, 4 hours, for example, energy to power ratio, a certain round trip efficiency, a certain availability, and see what is the contribution of that technologies to achieving the RES integration target. What is the extra capacity I need to put into the system to meet my RES integration target at national level? Now, if I do this exercise for all the different combination of technologies, I can think of plotting something like you see here in the chart on the left. So the chart that is basically looking at what is the contribution of each additional pieces of resources, so each additional flex capacity in reducing my risk curtailment. This is, of course, let's say some sample chart, but it's showing that, for example, a technology that has a 4-hour energy to power ratio for the system that we used as a reference for producing this chart will be the fastest in reducing the risk curtailment. Up to a certain point, of course, because the more you add, the less is beneficial. So until you reach a certain point in the curve, you are producing more benefits from just a technical perspective, and then you can pass to the other technologies. So this is already providing still remaining in the technology neutral framework from just a technical perspective and information about the possible hierarchy of technologies that can contribute to meeting your RES integration target. And then this is an approach that, let's say, stays within the framework of the flexibility needs assessment, but can be used also beyond it, because using the same approach, the same comparative approach of technologies, but taking into consideration, for example, cost information, CapEx and OpEx of technologies, can allow the policymaker, the TSOs, depending if he's entrusted to do so, the DSOs and any other entity, to also produce the same chart, but considering what is the contribution of the given technologies to not only achieve the RES integration target, but also achieve this at the minimum cost for the system. So we are also providing, let's say, the approach for running this type of economic assessment to ensure that at the end, the policymaker can take, let's say, an informed decision also from the point of view of cost efficiency. But we recognize that this is something that goes beyond a bit the FNA, where we focus on the needs. The resources, it's more on the policymaker to decide, also based on a number of additional conditions of information, geopolitics, national strategies, and a number of things. So we focus on what is technical, what is that we can provide. Okay, and we close with just the last slide, and then we open for, we have the conclusions, and then we open for the Q&A. The last slide, I mean, you can go back. It's simply, we also provided many comments on the possibility to amend the methodology. So we translated this into a couple of articles, let's say, comprising a number of elements, some, let's say, derogation of exceptions, but this is not really important. It's for specific cases. For the amendment of the methodology, definitely this is something that we wanted to introduce because it's not provided in the regulation to amend the methodology, but we recognize this is the first exercise, the first cycle of flexibility needs assessment. There will be improvements potentially in the future. It's in any case, let's say, a rather academic topic, or it was, when we started. So we are, for the first time, putting something together. There will be improvements to make in the future. So we introduce an approach to make sure that this is done, and in a way which will be very similar to the one we are just completing. So we're basically we collect the requests from the stakeholders, we translate them into possible amendments, and then there is an ACER approval. So nothing really changes with respect to the approach that we envisioned for the moment, although also this one was not perfectly regulated in the MDR. So you'll see also an article related to amendments of the methodology. I think we can go to the conclusion then, Shilpa, and then Q&A.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Hubert. So we will be providing our official version of our response to the public consultation by the end of this month. We are well on our way to submit the final draft to ACER by 16th April or 17th April, actually. We will also host another public webinar for describing the final draft. And this is scheduled to be at the end of April also. We have not finalized the date. So I hope everyone had a really good time listening to this webinar, and you have developed an overall picture of the draft development till now. And thanks a lot for listening. And now it's time to go to the Q&A sessions. So I'm going to sort by popularity. So the first question, we have already enabled the microphones for the people who are asking the questions. So if Cesar Martinez Villar can ask the question, otherwise I can read it. How does this process fit within the initiative of ACER to come up with an analytical tool to deliver the EU-wide flexibility needs assessment? I also have to say that we have our ACER colleagues in this call, and if you want to compliment, please feel free to do so. But please, Hubert and Mario.
On this one is more a question to Acer actually than to us. Of course, we are interacting a lot with Acer for the finalization of this methodology, and I think the idea is, of course, to replicate a bit the analysis that is based on the methodology, but at pan-EU level, on the union level assessment that the MDR entrusted to Acer. On the tool, if Acer wants to say something, I mean, of course, I can pass the floor to them. But otherwise, I think, it's a discussion for after the methodology is completed, basically.
Manolis or Arthur, do you want to share something?
Yes, just a short reply. Thank you for the question. I wanted to say that this ACER assessment will be actually an input for ACER to meet its obligations according to the regulation, so to provide recommendations and analyze the national assessment. So it's viewed as a complementary assessment from our side, but we aim to use the same methodology. So we are going to use this methodology as well, and also the same input data as much as possible, of course. So we see that there is a link between this methodology and our assessment.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go to the next question from Vincent. At what level of geographical granularity will the resulting flexibility needs assessment be presented?
Okay, on this one, I think from the DSO perspective, let's say it's an information at the bidding zone level, or let's say it's more at a country level, that there are countries that have multiple bidding zones. So in the case, you can provide a picture for the whole country. But the analysis is in any way using the same geographical granularity as the ERA, basically, or adequacy assessment, which is typically the bidding zone, the market zone, how you want to call it. I must say, and I leave the floor to Hubert in a second, also for the fine-tuning of the system need, of course, we use the same granularity. So basically, if there is information provided by the DSOs, it's then used as an input to the bidding zone analysis in any case. But I think for the DSO, the information is even more granular. So Hubert.
Yes, indeed. Recall that the finest granularity for flexibility needs is indeed achieved in each network development plan. So if people want to have a fine granularity of need, you go to the market information, which is the most granular. It is on that transformer, that feeder, whatever. You go on the NDP, which is the overall picture over the next 5 to 10 years with as much time and locational granularity as possible. That's in NCDR. So obviously in this national assessment, this is to somehow give the overall picture to policymakers to define a framework. And when we give a framework to policymakers, they don't define it by feeder, they don't define it by transformer, they define nationally. So at the end of the day, the purpose of this report is to provide an overall picture for policymakers to make decision to member state, ACER, and later on the Commission. But again, the Commission and ACER will not rule a feeder or transformer. However, we will make nationally a coordinated spatial granularity. That's the first task within the 3 months. And indeed, it is to address, is it really relevant to have a national figure, or can we a bit fine-tune a bit? But remind, the purpose of this methodology is primarily to give a national figure, or a figure to national policymakers.
Okay, thank you, Hubert. Before I go to the next question, I would like to show this QR code again, because I see a lot of questions asking for the slides after this webinar or slides of this webinar. So again, I would like to repeat that the slides and the recording will be available in the public consultation page, which you can access through this QR code here, or directly just Google public consultation on flexibility needs assessment. So we will make it available. Next question. Did I understand well that data to carry out the assessment are expected to be available only after 10 months? After the approval by ACER of the methodology? If so, NRAs have 1 year after approval by ACER of the methodology to perform the assessment. So having data only 2 months before this deadline may be quite short.
So on this, I mean, I think we clarified that we are not expecting NRAs to run the analysis or implement the methodology. So what is that is provided is not the data, but is data and analysis, which basically means the set of input and output data, which are the results of the analysis. So the role of the NRA or the designated entity in this case is to finalize the report, also including the analysis of market barriers and contribution of digitalization, which is not part of the methodology, but is part of the report, and then should be done in parallel with respect to the analysis which are carried out at national level by TSOs and DSOs, and then adopt the report. So for this, let's say that we consider it 2 months, which is taking basically the information which are already a final one provided by TSOs and DSOs, and then put them together with this analysis of market barriers and contribution of digitalization, and arrive into the final version of the report. So we are not expecting, just to provide the input and then the analysis is on someone else, because again, the regulation says that we need to provide data and analysis. I mean TSOs and DSOs.
Okay. Let's go to the next question from Bram. Would a solution to resolve DSO and TSO need differences in large bidding zones be to calculate shadow nodal prices? So I assume the question is about if you are fine-tuning the system needs with network 1, then would it create shadow nodal prices?
I mean, I answer it, but more from a general perspective. From a modeling perspective, let's say in the methodology, this is not something that we are doing. Of course, we are running the analysis at the bidding zone level, and as I mentioned, for the fine tuning, reflecting some network information on the system needs assessment. From a let's say solution perspective, of course, also the change in the market design could be a solution, but this is not addressed specifically in the flexibility needs assessment, because we really need to provide some numbers at the very end to the policymaker. The policymaker, of course, knows that could be other ways to solve problems, but the role of the FNA is to quantify the needs, no matter on the possible solutions that we could have. Okay, so we first quantify. We have this gigawatt of need for the REST integration, for the ramping, for the network, and then provide as many information as possible to also clarify, from a technical perspective, how we could solve the need. But then it's the policymaker to take basically a larger view on the topic and arrive to decisions to be included in NECPs.
Thank you. And next question from Paulo. So seeing the overlap between ERA and FNA, do you have a strategy to measure the overlap between flexibility needs assessment and the resource adequacy assessment?
It's a bit part of what I just mentioned. So at a certain point, we need to comply with the ERA. So we are starting from the same set of input and output, but at the same time, there is a certain point in which we basically take 2 different paths. Because the ERA is then, quantifying LOLE, energy not served, which might result in some extra resources that the member state introduces in the system through capacity remuneration mechanism and so on. So normally this would come back into the analysis, but in the future, once this capacity remuneration mechanism is introduced, it translates into extra capacity that we insert into our reference condition to then quantify flexibility needs. And the same goes for the flexibility, because we quantify flexibility needs that translate into resources that could be introduced into our system through dedicated support mechanism. It's not a perfect, let's say, process because, of course, there could be resources that are introduced for adequacy reason that can contribute to flexibility and vice versa. But let's say also this element is also somehow described in the whereas of the methodology as an element that, of course, the policymaker, when taking informed decision, must consider, the full picture. It's, let's say, it's part of the game, I would say, of the assessments.
Okay. I'll take a DSO question and then we can close the session. The illustrative example of the flexibility needs shows the flexibility needs as either energy or power, but not as megawatt per time or ramping capability. So what units are used to quantify the ramping flexibility needs? Sorry, that has DSO part as well.
But DSO needs do not address ramping needs. Ramping needs are system needs. So all what we care as network operators, DSO for the network and DSOs for the network, is only the instantaneous value. Is the power above the capacity of a transformer cable? It's not a ramping. It's just the overall time. So that's why it's only in terms of power and megawatt hour.
Okay. So unfortunately, our time for the webinar is now
If I may,
over.
Shilpa, just
Yes.
I take another one because I think it's important,
Sure.
which is this one from Paul, which says what actually means RES integration needs, as RES is also providing flexibility. Because I know that this came many times, so let me clarify on this. Of course, also renewables can provide flexibility. You can always think of curtailing flexibility, but this is a very important clarification that we have to make, because our target, what the Commission is asking us to do with this FNA, is to make sure that we can achieve our RES integration or policy targets. Okay, so basically we are not looking at the same at the best solution from a cost efficiency perspective without any constraint, because we know that to operate our system we could also simply curtail renewables, but the point is that we will not be meeting our RES integration targets. So something that we agreed to meet, there is an European one, there are national ones as well that all talk to each other, so that at the end altogether as single member states can contribute to achieving the European one. But what we are doing in this FNA is to quantify flexibility needs in the most cost-efficient way possible, but with the constraints of achieving our policy targets. So that's why we cannot consider as a principle RES as a source of downward flexibility. Curtailment, if it's too high, is not a solution, because we need to ensure that we achieve our RES integration target. Okay.
Thank you. We see a lot more comments and questions. Whenever possible, we can answer this one. You can always reach out to us. You have our emails in the screen. So thanks a lot, everyone. Have a very nice day. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.